Roadside motels. If you were lucky enough to be around in the 1950s and the 1960s, then you'll surely remember those glowing neon signs beckoning in road-weary travelers for a well-deserved rest. Most of these affairs were mom and pop operations, and Reno had a disproportionately high number of them due to our tourist-based economy. Some of these buildings still remain, and some of them are long gone. So on this episode, let's take a look at our Motel Americana here on the Reno You Know. In this video, we're going to be looking at motels that were located on West 4th Street, which used to be Highway 40 and the Lincoln Highway, the road across the continent. Up until the 1970s, this was the heavily used and congested artery into Reno from California. I took an inventory of motels on the entire length of 4th Street, including the east side beyond downtown, and there were almost 50 sites that I could share with you, which is too many for one video, so I'm going to start with just West 4th Street, the California side. If this video does well enough and you'd like to see more of this, then I'll follow up with a video on the sites on East 4th Street. So please share this video with a friend and be sure to subscribe to our channel. All right, this is how I'm going to do this. It's 1955. And we're residents of the Bay Area, and we're going to break away to Reno for some Nevada-style action. But where are we going to stay? The more affordable option to the pricier hotels downtown would have been the motor hotels, or the motels as they became to be known. And these became increasingly popular in the post-war years as people started to venture out and spread their wings in their automobiles after the constrictive years of World War II. We're probably never going to see an era again in which these little privately owned mom and pop motels are the norm. After Interstate 80 effectively bypassed Old Highway 40 in the 1970s, these properties fell on hard times and they were forced to pivot into weekly or monthly or full-time residential models. And as a whole, these properties continued to deteriorate, which contributed to the fact that so many of these have been destroyed and demolished over the years. So here we are above the old River Inn, which used to have a motel situation down there when the area was known as Lawton's Hot Springs. And this motel would have been one of the first that a traveler would have encountered when coming in from California. And I actually did an entire video on this property, and it's actually become the second most watched video of all time on this channel, at least as of the date of this filming. If you haven't seen that video yet, I will leave a link to that video at the end of this one. All right, we're continuing eastward towards downtown Reno, and this little complex on the side of Old Highway 40 is actually pretty easy to miss. And today it's called the Siesta Village. But back in the day, this property was named the Irisher Tavern and Motel. And I start to see newspaper references popping up about it starting around 1969. And I actually found a reference to somebody living at this address in 1965, but I can't determine if it was a motel then or not. This newspaper article from 1972 states that a restaurant called the Old World Restaurant was operating here in conjunction with the 14 motel units. The chef here was a Peter Koenig, a native of Germany that had experience in several five-star hotels in Europe and then came to the US and ended up here in Nevada. Peter Koenig later leased the Old World Restaurant and took over business operations. In addition to the restaurant and the motel units, the property featured a tavern, a swimming pool with cartoon representations of the zodiac signs on the bottom, and a boutique shop. Red Cody, who was a former entertainment director at Harrah's, an accomplished musician and a well-known entertainer in the area for decades, would play here in the evenings. Also in 1973, the property owner, Beverly O'Hara, was licensed for the Gandy Dancer Railroad Bar, which was a 24-hour affair that featured live rock and roll music. And I was able to find references to that business in the newspapers only up until about 1975, after which I believe that went out of business. And at one point, Miss O'Hara had thoughts of converting the old motel rooms into boutique shops. But apparently the whole dream was over by the mid-1970s. All right, we're gonna walk on down here and see what there is to see at the former location of the Irisher Tavern and Grill. And this over here must have been the old restaurant slash bar. And I actually contacted the property manager here and I said, hey, does it look like a restaurant or a bar anymore? And she says, oh no, you probably don't want to go in there. It's just used for storage. But that's where that would have been. And one of the old strip of motel rooms over on this side. And this is pretty much adjacent to Old Highway 40 on the back side of the building. And over here, it's the old swimming pool, a ghost pool that someone filled in years ago, probably in the 1970s or so. You could just imagine the tourists back in the day frolicking in the water here on near the banks of the Truckee River and adjacent to the railroad tracks.
Serendipity was with me on this visit because I met a gentleman there that actually lives in the old restaurant building. He wasn't ready for someone to film inside on such short notice, but he did allow me to take some photos, and it was really cool to see features of the old restaurant that are still there. He has a really unique collection of old Reno memorabilia, and he might be agreeable to a video on just that in the future. So cross your fingers that happens.
Just down the road to the east is the Jackpine Motel, and this little motel was built in 1947, and it's been known as the Jackpine since that time. This has been a quiet little property for almost 80 years, and today it serves as a residence for a handful of people. Next door to it, just to the east, was the Siesta Motel, and that was in operation for more than 60 years. And today that site is the location of self-storage units. The Siesta Motel was torn down in 2002, but at one time it had quite a booming business.
A World War II veteran named Lester Van Landgraf, who served from Omaha Beach up through the Battle of the Bulge, purchased the Siesta Motel in 1946 after returning home, and he owned it all the way till the end. In a newspaper article written just before the demolition of the Siesta, Lester recounted how busy they were in the 1940s through the 1960s before the new interstate cut them off. It was a classy operation with inviting green grass and a swimming pool they installed in 1953, the first pool built at a motel in Reno since the war. Besides all the tourists, entertainers would also stay there, mostly lounge acts, but one notable guest was Ray Bolger, best known as the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz. His photo hung in the motel lobby for years after that. The Siesta also prided itself on being available to anyone. During those days, discrimination at hotels was fairly common, and black folks weren't welcome in many places, but the Siesta took them in and regularly took referrals from the entertainment directors of the casinos for entertainers that were welcome to perform at the hotel casinos, but it wasn't agreeable for them to get accommodations there. Also, Dan Aykroyd and Kirk Douglas spent 3 days at the Siesta Motel shooting scenes for their 2000 movie, Diamonds.
I'm sorry, but I have to try it again.
We stop every half hour, we wait 20 minutes, and nothing happens.
But I'd have to try to go.
Daddy's gotta go.
Evening.
Hello. I need a double room with a cot, please.
And a VCR.
No VCR.
This is the area of Old Highway 40, today's 4th Street, just west of McCarran Boulevard, and this is not the original alignment of this section of the road. This entire area was a farmer's field, as shown in this old photo from the 1920s. The road originally took a hard right just past the hill and wound around the far right side of the field. At some point before 1945, the road was realigned and straightened, and this is where several motels sprung up. This is the old 40 West Motel, also located along that later realignment. Named for the road that it sits on, it also no longer caters to the tourist trade and adapted with weekly or monthly stays, just like every motel along this corridor. As time has marched along, this old place was surrounded by the same storage business that took over the site of the Siesta Motel. Maybe these owners refused to sell like the Siesta owner did, and so the storage units were simply built around the property. This property was built out in 1945 by a couple named Thomas and Martha Treadway, who met in San Francisco during World War II, and they loved visiting Reno. Here's a photo of Martha Treadway out front in 1950. They named their building Tread's Hotel and Apartments, and they lived there and did the housekeeping, and then they sold the place around 1952. And here's a fun fact shared by her son, who I spoke with on the phone. Many years later, Martha Treadway became the first woman to run for the United States Senate for the state of Texas in 1961. In searching the old newspapers, the last year that I found Treads offering rooms in the classifieds was 1987, so probably around that time the property changed hands, or it was at least renamed. I also found references to a Trudy's Cafe, which operated as a coffee shop on the property in the 1960s. In addition, I also found records of a business called the Black Bull Inn, which operated as a topless nightclub here in the early 1980s. The new apartment buildings here, which are just to the east or the downtown side of McCarran Boulevard on 4th Street, are on the site of 4 ghost motels that used to occupy this property. Located here were the Zephyr Motel, the Westerner, the Silver Spur, and the Dutch Wife Motel. The Zephyr opened sometime earlier than 1946 and had a pretty spiffy neon sign out front. The sign included a super cool neon swimmer to help promote the motel's heated pool. There was a pretty nasty fire at the 17-unit Zephyr in 1989, which I'm sure helped to accelerate its demise. The fire started due to a faulty furnace on a January night, and it quickly spread through the attic, forcing the 16 residents there to vacate. The Westerner next door was built in 1948 and had a horseshoe-themed sign out front. This promotional piece for the Westerner was created by Lou Heimers, who was Reno's preeminent commercial artist in the first half of the 20th century. Lou had a long career, including stints at the San Francisco Chronicle, where he worked alongside, believe it or not, Robert Ripley, the Walt Disney Company, and the Washington Post. After those experiences, he returned to Reno in 1932 and generated thousands of pieces in pen and ink that reflected the personalities of the day and what Reno meant to him and the country. The Westerner was also a victim of a fire, this one in 1952, that nearly destroyed it. The Silver Spur Motel, which was next door to the Westerner, has a special significance for me because long before I moved to Reno, heck, long before I was born, my mother, as an 18-year-old on a family car vacation from Southern California, they stayed at the Silver Spur Motel, and this is how I know. In 1955, my pre-mom Luann, who had a lifelong love of documenting her travels, kept a journal of the family car trip from North Hollywood, California to Yellowstone and back. On the return trip, she wrote, Monday, June 27th, 1955. So we finally ended up in Reno, and as usual, Reno is just another Nevada gambling town. Oh, come on, Mom. We're more than that. Jimmy Durante is at the Riverside Hotel. There's a lovely river running through town where people fish. There's lots of trees and lovely old houses. Residential Reno is a very nice place to live. So to the Silver Spur Motel we go to rest. The Silver Spur Motel was built in 1951, and the sign itself stood outside of the property for many, many years after the property went out of business. And then one day in 2017, the sign disappeared. It got stolen. And a front page newspaper story ran about it. And about a week later, a couple showed up at the office of the property owner with the sign saying it had all been a big misunderstanding.
The last of the 4 motels in this little strip was the St. Francis, which later became the Dutch Wife Motel. 3 of the properties, the Westerner, the Silver Spur, and the Dutch Wife, a total of 6.5 acres, was acquired by a local realtor in the early 1990s to provide housing for low-income folks. That project morphed into Wildflower Village, which for years was a funky, artsy gallery for local artists, which also featured a chapel and a cafe. The owner even repurposed the old Westerner Motel sign to advertise Wildflower Village. Unfortunately, the project did not cash flow, and she sold the whole complex for less than half of what she put into it, and it all got bulldozed in 2016.
I stopped at the Tombstone Territory Motel just up the street before coming here. And the lady was nice there, but she didn't have much information on the old building or any photographs or anything like that. That one was built in 1941, and I can speculate that it was named Tombstone Territory because it is directly adjacent to the Mountain View Cemetery, which was established in 1871. And this might be the most cherry example in town of what these old motels used to look like back in the day. This is the Sunset Motel, and this is one of the oldest that we're going to see on this tour. This building was built in 1936, before World War II, before my parents were born. It's old. This property was first developed as the Sunset Auto Court, and auto court was a term used before the term motel came into common usage. Postcards from back in the day advertised this facility as having 25 rooms and then later 30 rooms. The Sunset Motel property is currently for sale, and I called up the realtor. Her number was on the sign out front, and I said, hey, would you be able to let our audience take a look inside and see some of the cool features of this really old motel? And she contacted the owner, and they both came down here today, and they're going to let us take a look around. Again, this building was built in 1936 and was very successful over the years when Old Highway 40 at 4th Street was a busy corridor getting people in and out of Reno to and from California, the Bay Area. And after Interstate 80 bypassed this area in the 1970s, of course, this place fell on hard times and was forced to convert to a weekly and monthly residential situation, which it did for many years. And unfortunately, there was a big kaboom here in 2020 during the pandemic. There was a big explosion in one of these rooms, and the place has been vacant ever since. But we're going to take a peek into one of these motel rooms so we can kind of get the feel of what it was like here to stay in the 1930s and 40s. All right, the owners opened up room number 123 for us, so we can take a peek inside one of these old rooms. Now, this is probably not going to look like a motel room from way back in the day because, you know, styles change and things have been updated. And also, this was a residential situation, so it's probably set up more for someone living here than like a nightly tourist. But the layout of the room is going to be pretty much the same as when it was built. And you've got these 2 little narrow doors here. I don't think they allow little narrow doors like this anymore. You can see the keyhole and where the old handle was. And this is the restroom here. Little sink. And there's a shower. Very cool. And then over here was one of the, well, is a little kitchenette. Now, I'm sure this kind of thing was added later for the residential situation. I don't think in the 1930s they would have had kitchens in a tourist motel, but very cool to see. Yeah, so the
like I say, although the decor and such has changed, the footprint, the layout is the same as what you would have seen in the 1930s. And this is the old gas heat that the building used to have, and each of these heaters is vented right outside the room with one of those. So that would have kept it toasty warm, I bet you. And this is so cool. This is a ghost pool. And I don't know when this was filled in, but it's a very clear outline of the old pool situation. And you just imagine all those old tourists back in the, I'm not sure, this was probably put in the 1950s, I would guess. That's when they became more prevalent. But you can just imagine all the bathers here. All right, I went to the back corner of the property here so I could get this whole complex behind us in the shot. And actually this looks like one building, but it was actually two, and it still is two. There are two separate lengthy sets of motel rooms behind me, and they were kind of covered up on the top at one point. So let's look in between the sets of motel rooms. All right, the owners opened up the back of the building for us so we can take a peek in between the two sets of buildings here. So, woo, here we go. Oh, nice. Yeah, you can clearly see the alleyway here between the two sets of motel rooms. So, you know, if you were staying in one of these rooms, your view would have simply been these rooms. And these look like the original windows here. I used to own an old home, and they had the same kind of closures and such. So those are assuredly from the 1930s. So if I can get the glare off the capture device here, that's a pretty cool angle. This old building appears in the old postcards, so it's original to the property. And of course this facade was put on later, but the rest of the building looks pretty original. The owner tells me, and the real estate agent tells me, that this was a wedding chapel at one time. I'm not sure the years, but they used it as a wedding chapel, and many years later it was converted into residence units. So it doesn't look like a chapel inside anymore. But this is probably where the owner / caretaker would have stayed, because in the old postcards it looks like a home. There's little flowers and such on the outside, so that's pretty neat looking. From the old postcards you can see that this part of the old building was the Sunset Grill, and of course it's been changed pretty seriously over the years. The owner added a registration window, but you can see the large picture windows here. That would have been for a cafe, the Sunset Grill. All right, that's the story so far of the Sunset Motel. This property currently is for sale, and the realtor says that someone could purchase it, rehab it into another rooming or residential situation, or it could be possibly clear cut and a high-rise put up. It is pretty close to downtown. We'll see what happens. Regardless, I'm glad I was able to take a peek and kind of record it a little bit before it changes or goes away. And I wanted to share this with the younger members of our viewing audience. This is what was called a telephone booth. And there was also a thing before cell phones called a public telephone. So if you need to call from Reno to your home in California or wherever you needed to call, you needed to jump in one of these situations, and the public phone was right there. You dropped a couple of coins in the slot, and then you need to look up a number. There was a thing called a phone book. The yellow pages, the white pages would hang right there, and you can sift through and find what you need to call. So there you go. This is the Tavern Motel, located about a block up the street from the Sunset. And this is one of only 2 properties where I've been able to unearth the name of the original owner and his story. This building has probably the most interesting architecture of those motels that we're going to see today.
And it has an interesting backstory. The El Tavern was constructed in 1948, but this was not the original building on this site. This originally was the site of the Tavern, one of Reno's oldest and best-known nightclubs. The Tavern was constructed in the early 1920s as a fried chicken shack known in the 1930s as Hutton's Hut. It was enlarged in 1932 and converted into a nightclub, and for many years at the Tavern there was fine dining, dancing to the house orchestra, and it served as a location for countless banquets and civic organization meetings, wedding receptions, and more. A gentleman named Victor Partipilo purchased the Tavern in 1939, and he owned it up until about 5 a.m. on May 4th, 1941, when a fire that started either in the kitchen or the basement spread and completely destroyed the building. The structure and its contents, except for 3 musical instruments of the orchestra, was a total loss, valued at $100,000 by Mr. Partipilo. He only had insurance to cover $20,000 of that. After several years, he built a motel on the site of the old nightclub and opened it in 1946. It opened as the El Tavern Court, and it advertised 40 air-conditioned rooms and a coffee shop on site. Victor Partipilo then sold the property in 1947, and this property has changed hands many times over the years. And in 1951, Victor purchased Tread's Motel for $125,000. Mr. Partipilo was born in 1886 in Italy and came to the United States in 1902 and arrived in Reno in 1908. Before he owned the Tavern, he was a professional musician in Reno for decades, and I tried to find a photo of him, but I came up empty-handed. He passed away in 1964, and he is in the mausoleum of Our Mother of Sorrows Cemetery here in Reno. This is the site of one of the most well-known and unique hosteleries on the old highway. This is the site of the Silver State Lodge, which was a collection of charming wood cabins that stood here on this site for more than 70 years. In 1931, the same year that gambling was legalized in Nevada and the residency requirement to get a divorce was lowered to just 6 weeks, a man named Charles Thompson purchased about 5 acres of an old family ranch and built the Silver State Lodge to capitalize on the new tourist and divorce trade. The operation consisted of 16 rustic cabins and a main lodge building. These cabins had pine paneling on the walls and ceiling, and each had a little kitchen and a front porch. This was a unique setup that contrasted to a regular old auto court or motel, and from the 1930s to the 1960s, this property attracted folks such as the divorce trade, motor tourists, and entertainers in town to perform. The most notable of those that stayed here were Bing Crosby and Greta Garbo. This would have been an ideal place for folks like this to stay due to the privacy of individual cabins that were located about a mile outside of town. Also, if you didn't know, Bing Crosby had a large cattle ranch outside of Elko, Nevada for many years, and he used that as a retreat to decompress from the rigors of show business. Also in 1932, while Max Baer was training upriver at Lawton's Hot Springs for his next fight, his manager found that property was too noisy for the champ to get a decent night's sleep, so his accommodations were moved down to the Silver State Lodge. In 1938, the property was sold to a Rodney Reynolds, who operated it for the next 25 years. His daughter, Pat Kloss, would many years later become one of the founders of the Historic Reno Preservation Society.
But my childhood began at the Silver State Lodge Motel. My grandparents had bought that, Earl and Leon Reynolds. They had moved from Elko into Reno, bought the motel. When my father came home from World War II, he and my mother bought the motel from my grandparents, built a house at the back of the motel, and that's where I lived as a little kid.
Like all of the other businesses, the Silver State suffered from the interstate bypass and the decline of the divorce industry, and at one point the cabins were used as low-income housing. Later, a few plans were floated to rehab the cabins, but nothing panned out, and the whole thing was demolished in 2005. I remember the old Silver State sign by the side of the road for several years after, but today that is just a memory itself. Between the Silver State Lodge and downtown itself was located several other businesses, and pretty much all of these are things of the past today. In 2010, I took it upon myself to photo document all of the remaining, at that time, motel signs in the Reno Sparks area, because back then I realized that these things were starting to go away. And because of those photographs that I still have, I'm able to share those with you here, those properties that were located in this area that are no longer with us. All right, thanks for hanging out with me on this video. I learned more about motels than I think I need to know, and I'm sure hope you enjoyed it. And again, if you like what you see, share it with a friend, and maybe I'll continue down East 4th Street. We're finishing up this video here at Davidson's Distillery on Santa Crawl night. Reno has a wonderful Santa Crawl every December before Christmas. Obviously before Christmas, they're not going to do it before Halloween. And my band is out here playing the Davidsons for the Santa Crawl. And with me today is Parker and Jordan, a couple of fans from the channel. They're here to see the band and hang out and do the Santa Crawl. So how long you been watching the channel, Parker?
Oh, it's probably been 2 years now.
Excellent. And Jordan?
Same.
Right?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, they're super cool for coming out. And that's pretty much all I've got for you. We got to get started with the band situation here. So if you want to do it with me, guys, as Harold S. Smith Sr. of Harold's Club always said, I'm with you. Cheers.
Cheers.
The second most watched video on this channel, at least of the date of this filming. And that building was purchased, no. Also in 1973, the property owner, Beverly O'Hara, was licensed for the Gandy Dancer Railroad Bar, which was a 24-hour affair that featured live rock and roll music. And hi puppy. Hi puppy. Hi puppies. Oh, pugs. I love pugs. This is the site of the Silver State Lodge, which was a collection of charming wood cabins that stood on this site the more affordable option to staying in the pricier hotels in downtown would be the motor. And the Siesta Motel was in operation for more than 60 years, and today that site is the location of self-storage units. Blah.